I welcome you all to the module 9. The module 9 is about social behavior or it is social psychology. We will talk about some of the important concepts related to social psychology. So, today's lecture is lecture number 22 and it is first lecture of this module. Overall, this is lecture number 22. So, today's lecture is titled as social perception. So, before we talk about today's lecture, let me give a brief recap of the last lecture. So, the last lecture was part of the earlier module on personality and we discussed psychoanalysis. So, there we discussed various concepts of psychoanalysis. We discussed concept of psychic determinism, instinct, structure of the mind, structure of the personality. We also discussed some of the criticism of Freudian theory and at the end we discussed the neo-Freudians, who are they and what are their ideas and so on. In today's lecture, we will talk about the concept of social perception. This is one of the important concepts within social psychology and we will talk about the concept of impression formation, biases in the impression. We will also talk about the concept of attribution, the various theories in the attribution and at the end we will talk about some of the possible applications of attribution theory. So, let us start today's lecture. Now, when we talk about social psychology, what is the meaning of social psychology and what are the things that we study in social psychology? So, it is again it is a scientific study of how individuals think. So, social psychology is a scientific study of how individuals think, feel and behave in relation to others and how those thoughts, feelings and behaviors are influenced by actual imagine or implied presence of the others. This is what one definition given by Alport in 1954. So, quite comprehensive definition of social psychology, which talks about. So, we scientifically we study in the social psychology how individuals think, feel and behave, thinking, feelings and behavior in the context of others, not only on your own. When there are people around you, either actual or imagined, how that situations influence your thinking, feeling and behavior. So, that is something that is we study in social psychology. More simpler definition, we can say social psychology is the scientific study of how individuals think, feel and behave in the presence of others, either actual or imagined. So, when others are present, in the presence of others, how people think, feel, behave, or how the presence of others influence the thinking, feeling and behavior of individuals. Now, that presence of others could be actual or it could be imagined, So, that is what is social psychology is all about. In personality psychology that we discussed in the earlier module, focused on individuals' differences, social psychology focuses on power of the situation. Okay. So, personality psychology focuses on individual differences. So, basically we discussed why one individual is different from another and how they are different from one another. So, we discuss in terms of traits and so on. So, the focus was finding individual differences and the uniqueness of the individual in the personality psychology. In social psychology, focus is more on how situation influence, social situations, presence of others influences the behavior. So, this is how it is different from personality. So, in today's lecture, we will focusing on the concept of social perception. So, social perception is one of the important topic within the social psychology, which involves processes through which we seek to understand other people. It is through social perception that we understand other people. There are various things that we use in the context of social perception, processes by which we form impressions and make judgments about other people. Okay. So, it is through perception that we form impressions of other people and we make judgments about other people, So, that is the one of the important concepts that we discussed in the social perception, that how do we form impressions when we see someone, what kind of impression we get about that person and how do we kind of form those impressions. So, that is one important part of the social perception, how we judge other people, how we judge the behavior of other people, causes of behaviors of other people, these are all comes under social perception. More specifically, we will discuss in this particular lecture the concept of impression formation and attribution. So, these two concepts we will discuss in today's lecture, which broadly comes under social perception. So, forming impressions of others, like how do you make judgments about other people, about their characteristics, about their qualities and so on. So, that is about impression formation. So, impression formation is the process by which we collect organize and interpret information about another person to arrive at a overall judgment. Okay. So, we collect information whenever we see someone, we try to collect, organize, interpret about that person, and then we make some judgment about that person. For example, we may say she is friendly, he is rude. So, these are all impression formation. So, we have certain impression about another person. Based on their behavior, certain data that we collect, organize and then interpret what kind of person he or she is. So, that is something called as the part of impression formation. So, impression formation involves what we notice, how we interpret it, how we combine pieces of information into a single impression. So, whatever we notice about a person, then we interpret whatever we notice, whatever the data we get about that person, then we combine all this data to form a proper judgment or impression about that person. Then we say what kind of person he or she is, we make certain impressions. So, impression formation is about how we form views of others. It is a central aspect of social perception. Okay. This process is fast, automatic and influenced by many cognitive shortcuts. Okay. Now, this impression formation that we form, the ideas and the views about another person, it is one of the very central idea in the social perception, because we all the time make impressions about other persons, about the characteristics of other people. Now, this process in the real world is actually very fast. We do not make judgment and calculate lot of things. Many times our impression formation process is very fast, very automatic, and many times we take very shortcuts in terms of cognitive shortcuts or thought processes to arrive at a situation, arrive at a judgment. So, in real life impression formation could be very fast, very automatic process. We notice something and we make judgment about people, that is something very important to understand, that this could be very fast automatic process. Now, one of the important or classic study that shows how we form impression is study by Solomon Asch study. So, Solomon Asch in 1946, he showed that first impression arise quickly and with little effort, influenced by Gestalt psychology. Asch argued that impressions are holistic. We integrate traits into unified whole rather than simply adding them up. So, whenever we see certain characteristics of individual, we do not add them up just like linear adding, but we form an holistic impression of the person. So, to test this, he presented participants with trait lists describing a stranger. Two lists differed only in warm and cold. So, this was a very small experiment that was done by him. What he did? He wrote the description of two individuals, both are strangers for the participants, and he gave a list of characteristics. Now, both the lists were exactly same except for one word. One list, the word warm was used as a characteristics of the person, and for another list, in place of warm, cold was used, and all the other characteristics are same. So, we will see other characteristics in the next extension of this study also. So, what he found, although the lists were almost identical, impression differed sharply. Individual described as warm were judged more positively, whereas the cold person was evaluated negatively. Although all the other characteristics were same, only two characteristics differed, only one characteristics differed. One was listed as warm, another was listed as cold. This just difference of one word created huge difference in their impression formation of the person. So, the person who was described as in warm with the word warm, they were more positively judged, and the person who was described with the word cold were more negatively judged. What he called this warm cold is a central trait, like this is a very important trait of people that can evaluate your judgment, very strongly. So, that is the idea of central traits, because they strongly shape overall impressions. By contrast, substituting let us say something like polite, blunt produced no major differences, indicating these were peripheral traits. So, some traits are central traits, like these are major characterization of a person. Warm, cold is such characteristics, these are central traits. This completely influences our perception of the person. even though everything else may be same, but this one trait can make huge difference in terms of your impression formation and judgment about the person. Some traits are not so central, these are peripheral. For example, polite, blunt. When the list was kept same and this one word was different, one was polite, another was blind, it did not create such differences. So, these were like peripheral traits. So, it also depends on what kind of trait you are talking about. Accordingly, the judgment will differ. Not all traits are equal in terms of their influence of the judgment. So, Solomon as such concluded that impression formation involves perceived traits in relation to each other. So, in an overall certain permutation computation, and overall they make a holistic judgment, creating an integrated impression of the whole person rather than isolated characterizing and adding them. His work remains foundation for understanding how quickly and powerfully first impression forms. Okay? So, this is one of the first experimental study that showed how quickly and powerfully first impression can be formed based on certain characteristics. Now, we have seen in the last experiment there were certain traits are central traits because they influence your impressions of other people very strongly. So, central traits are dominant personal characteristics and they have a very strong impact on others' judgment about the person. They greatly influence the meaning we attach to other traits. Harold Kelly replicated the earlier experiment that was done by Ash study. He replicated in the classroom setting, the same study, only the sample were different. Now, the setting was classroom settings, confirming the powerful impact of the central trait on impression formation. So, Kelly's classic study he did in 1950, two groups were told the lecturers. Now, here the earlier experiment was about strangers, here two group of students were told about a lecturer, and they used certain characteristics of the lecturer. So, like warm, industrious, critical, practical, determined. One group were told this is the characteristics of the lecturer. Another group of students were told that the lecturer was cold, industrious, critical, practical, determined. You see, all the traits remain same except this warm and cold. The same method he used of the earlier experiment. So, if you see only these two are different, all the other remaining characteristics remain same. Everything except warm, cold was the same. What was the finding? How was the impression formed? Warm group rated the lecturer more positively, cold group rated him more negatively. The similar finding as we have seen in the earlier experiment. So, why this happened? Because this is a central trait, like warm, cold is a central trait, act as an anchor trait and it influences your judgment very strongly. Once we hear them, they color the interpretations of other informations. They kind of become more dominant in terms of influencing in decision, and others may not have that kind of influence. So, for example, industrious plus warm, when we say it looks like this person is hardworking and helpful. When we say industrious plus cold, the impression formed by the people are generally hardworking, but unapproachable. The word cold whenever is used, generally this gives a sense that this person is unapproachable. So, then some kind of negative judgment kind of kicks in and so on. So, thus central traits shape the overall meaning structure of impression formation. Okay? Central trait shapes the overall meaning structure of the impression formation. So, because they influence very strongly. So, at least these two experiment clearly shows that. Now, another theory that talks about how we form impression about other people is trait integration or averaging model. Now, researcher found that people often use a mental average of the traits they perceive to form a final impression. So, we kind of get an average sense of whatever characteristics we know about a person, and we create a mental average and then we make impressions of the person. It suggests that we do not just add up every piece of information we learn about someone, instead we mentally calculate the mean value of those traits. Like we do not add up characteristics 1, 2, 3 and then we make a judgment, we just make an average of something and make an overall impression of the person. So, it was proposed by Norman H. Anderson in the late 1960s. This leads to a fascinating psychological quirk that adding a moderately positive trait to a list of highly positive trait can actually lower someone overall opinion of the person, because we create a mental average. So, if somebody has a very, let us say, a lot of moderate positive characteristics, or you create something less positive to a very high positive list of positive characteristics, the overall positivity will go down, because we create a mental average. We will try to understand this by some examples. So, this is similar to computing the mathematical mean or average. A very positive trait can raise the whole impression and a negative can lower it again. One trait could lower a lot of positive traits, overall all the positive impression can become very low. For example, Ravi is described as intelligent, kind, honest, but one word was used, lazy. Even though the most traits are positive, then one negative trait like lazy lowers the overall impression. Everything else is very positive, but this one negative trait will lower the overall impression of the person. So, that is how, because if you just add one by one, then it should not have much influence, but because we create a mental average, it kind of lowers it. So, the final impression moderately positive, not very extremely positive, okay, because of just adding one negative characteristics. Similarly, let us say in the online rating of products, this has a huge influence. Let us say product A has 3 reviews and all are 5-star reviews. You feel this is a perfect premium product because everybody has given 5-star. We do not look into the fact that this is only 3 reviews. Let us say there is another product B has more reviewers overall and got here also 3 reviews 5-star, here also 3 5-star reviewed, but another 5 given 4-star. You feel it is a good, but not truly excellent as compared to this. But if you see the product B has more reviews, overall more positive reviews, because much more number of people have given positive reviews, and 5-star 3 people given, here also 3 people, but again 5 more people have given 4-star. So, it kind of, when you take a mental average, it seems like this is impression little bit goes down. So, even though the second product has more total points of positivity, the 4-star reviews act as a moderate weight that brings down the overall mental average, and people seems to kind of form a little bit lower positive impression about the product as compared to the product A. Now, next question comes, how quickly and accurately are impression formed? As we discussed in the beginning of the lecture, that impression formation could be very fast. Let us see how quickly we can form impressions. Research in social perception shows that first impression forms extremely quickly and are often slightly better than chance inaccuracy. Okay. So, generally when you create first impression of a person, it is generally very quickly we create lot of impressions, the judgments about the persons is quite quick, and many people actually are very accurate in lot of these impressions. Obviously, there can be errors and so on, but it seems there are a lot of accuracy in that also. Much of the work focuses on judgments based on thin slices or very small samples of behavior or appearances. We just judge a person based on very thin slices of behaviors, small few case aspects of the behavior, and then we make judgments. So, the thin slices of behavior basically means very small sample of behavior. You just see for few seconds few information and then you make judgment or impression about a person, like facial expression, some tone, posture, gesture and so on. Research finding shows people can accurately judge someone's friendliness, competence or dominance based on some few seconds of observation made after long interaction. Research shows that even people who take lot of long times to interact and so on, and who take very few seconds, many times the judgments are almost similar, not much different. For example, a 5-second clip of a teacher can predict student rating of the whole semester. This shows how quick and powerful first impression. So, it is not just about accuracy, the thing is that we very quickly form impressions, and it can be very powerful, and very quickly people make impressions of people, So, people may not take very long time to make judgments about people. Studies show that people can form reasonably accurate, not all the time they are accurate. Obviously, when you make judgment based on very thin slices of behavior, there can be many errors and so on. But reasonably, a lot of people make, reasonably accurate judgment even in the small, from the thin slices of behaviors, based on photos, silent short videos, brief clips of body movement and so on. This impression often correlate with the real personality trait. This is what at least some social psychology research indicated. Some of the key findings: the thin slice judgment are often accurate, often not every time. Personality traits, especially extroversion, can be inferred from brief movement cues. Some characteristics can be very quickly one can make judgment, like if someone is extrovert, it is very, one can very easily and very quickly can form an impression of that person. Even body movements alone can predict extroversion rating. So, with minimal information, people can make above chance judgment of others. Okay? It seems above chance accuracy is there in terms of even though there are minimal information about the persons. In terms of impression formation, so the process could be quite quick, and people generally take thin slices of behavior, not very elaborate. So, how fast do we form impressions? The research shows it could be very fast, even within milliseconds or within seconds. For example, one study by Wills and Todorov 2006 shows that the participant viewed faces for 1/10 of a second, half of a second and 1 second. Then they rated the strangers on several traits. So, they basically showed faces of people. For some group it is 1/10 of a second, so for some group it is half a second, for some it is 1 second. Then they rated the strangers on several traits: trustworthiness, competence, likability, aggressiveness and attractiveness. Certain characteristics were given, they are supposed to rate on this based on whatever they have seen. These impressions ratings were compared with the rating provided by another group of people who were allowed to examine photos for the same actors or same photographs without any time constraint. So, they could take more time. So, groups who took very less time, like 1/10, half or a second, and the group who took enough time without any time constant. So, this was like the same photograph, they had to judge the same people based on the same characteristics. Everything else was same, only time period was given different. Rating of the two groups were found to be very similar. So, they were highly correlated. In fact, correlations between the two sets of rating range about 0.6 to 0.75, which is highly or strong correlation. So, for the first impressions can be formed very quickly and slightly better than chance in terms of accuracy. So, this is at least shows based on impression formation studies. Now, when we form impression, there is another important concept that also influences impression formation, that is called schemas. So, schemas are like mental frameworks that we use, or templates we use to organize information about social categories and personality types. So, we all have certain mental framework for every kind of situations or individuals, and how and accordingly we behave. So, we can have examples of schemas of person, like somebody is a friendly person. So, how you behave when you meet that person. When you have a mental framework of aggressive person, you think that person is an aggressive. So, you will have certain different kind of behavior toward that person, introvert, leader and so on. So, whatever mental schema we have, we create about a person, about a situations, our behavior also follows differently as per our mental frameworks. So, and it creates, it influences our first impression also. The moment you judge someone as introvert, someone as extrovert, then your whole impression of the person also changes according to the impression that we form. So, schemas are like broad mental framework that we use to make decisions. For example, we have a schemas about restaurants. So, we know when we go to a restaurant, what we are supposed to do. We go, then we see menu, and then we give order, and accordingly. So, there are certain frameworks we have and that we follow when we go to a restaurant. Similarly, we can have a mental schema about different persons, and that can influence your first impressions. So, once someone shows one or two traits matching that schema, the moment you get one or two characteristics from that person based on your interaction, you create a whole mental framework about that person. We fill the other gaps automatically using shortcuts. For example, if a person is talkative and smiley, we may fit other characteristics automatically. We may automatically assume that this person fits into a gregarious category or schema, where he or she will be friendly, open, fun loving and so on. We have not seen these characteristics, but because of these two characteristics, we are assuming this other person, the person will have these characteristics also. So, we fill the gaps. So, that is something called as, that is influenced by schemas, because you have a schema of person with talkativeness and smiling, that means gregarious characteristics of a person, and we assume the other characteristics will follow automatically. So, if you see, schemas help us to process information quickly, but can lead to stereotypes and errors. So, what we are doing, basically using a mental framework based on few characteristics, you are filling the gaps, like you are adding other characteristics and assuming that others will follow, which may not be true in the real life. So, it helps you to quickly get an impression of the person. So, that is why most of the people use that, but that can also lead to stereotypes and errors also. So, for example, someone may assume that boys are naturally better at mathematics than girls, and girls are better at languages and so on. So, let us say this is, a lot of people have such kind of mental frameworks. So, they will judge boys and girls accordingly, which may not be true in all the cases. So, that is an example of stereotypes. You are assuming if somebody is a boy, so generally he will be better in maths as compared to girls, and girls are better at language. So, these are like stereotypes. You create a rigid frameworks and you judge people accordingly, but this can be error because people are different, not every girls and every boy is same and so on. So, this is an example how schema can help you to process information quickly, because you do not have to think anything. You have seen a boy or a girl, you make certain assumptions, but then it can lead to many errors also. Now, many times impression formation is influenced by our present mood, whatever emotions we are experiencing, the kind of emotional state that can influence your impression formation also. For example, if you are in a happy mood, probably you will more likely to have make positive impressions of another person. If somebody is in a bad mood, they are more likely to have negative impressions of a person. It may not have anything to do with the person, but because you are in a bad mood, so you are making some negative impressions about the person. So, it is influenced by your mood. It may not be actually coming from the other person. So, mood can act as a filter. A positive mood highlights positive cues, because when you are in positive mood, you are more likely to see positive things in the person. When you are in a negative mood, you are more likely to process negative information. So, accordingly your impression formation will be influenced. So, this can bias without even our awareness, or we may not be even conscious about it. So, as we said, impression formation, people make a lot of quick impression formation is a very quick process. There can be errors or biases in the impression, especially when we use schemas and so on. But central traits make impression formation fast, but they are also create errors, because you are judging based on few characteristics. Even when schemas are inaccurate, they persist because it helps us to simplify complex world. Many times we find our mental frameworks are not correct, still we continue to use them, because it simply help you to process the information quickly about the social world. Some of the common errors that we make in the impression formations are overgeneralization from one trait, stereotyping, confirmation bias. Let us see one by one. These are errors that we form in the impression formation. First is overgeneration from one trait. So, judging a person's entire personality based on one single characteristics, which may stand out. So, one single characteristic you see and you judge the whole person, So, and it can be, it may not be correct. For example, a student answers one question correctly in the class and the teacher thinks he is very intelligent in all subjects. Let us say this is the case. This will be an example of overgeneralization. Just based on one or two behavioral characteristics, you are judging the whole personality of the person. This may not be true. So, this is an example of overgeneralization. Then stereotyping, we have already given one example. Here you judge people based on the group memberships, like somebody is boy, somebody is a girl, somebody is this culture, that culture. So, somebody is member of a group, and you are not judging that person individually, you are judging based on their group membership, and you think all the members in that groups are same, like you say boys and girls. So, you are judging all boys will be same, all girls will be same. So, that is a stereotype. So, for example, you meet an elderly person and you think they won't understand technology. So, you are judging, you are not judging that person, you are judging the group membership of that person, this whole group membership. So, that is these are stereotypes and it can create errors. The third error that happens is confirmation bias. So, we notice information that fits the schema. We assume something and we only see if that is present or not. We do not even notice other things which are counter to that. Just we always try to confirm whatever biases we have and notice only that information, and we neglect other information. So, that is a problematic part in terms of that is called confirmation bias. So, for its tendency to notice and remember information that supports our existing beliefs and ignore what contradicts them. Whatever is we believe, we only or our belief is supported, only we see those information, and if something contradicts our beliefs, we simply ignore them. For example, you think a friend is lazy. So, that is your mental framework. You think about a person that he is a very lazy person. So, what we will do? Confirmation bias, how will it work here? When they skip work, you always notice. Whenever they show the symptoms of laziness, you always notice and point out you are very lazy. But many times the same person can also work hard, but you do not simply notice, you simply ignore it. You see, this may be an exception or something like that, So, because that is a confirmation bias, because you want to confirm, because you have a belief in your mind this person is lazy. So, whenever he shows laziness, you notice it and you amplify it. Whenever the person shows the contradictory behavior, you do not even notice and ignore it. So, that is called confirmation bias. So, these are some of the things and factors related to impression formation. Now, we will talk about another important concepts in the social perception, which is called attribution. Attribution is about how we understand the causes of another behavior. In the impression formation, what we did? We try to understand the characteristics of a person, and in the attribution process, we try to understand why this person behaves in certain ways. What is the reason for such behaviors? It is not about the person, but about the causes of the behavior. So, attribution theory explains how people determine the causes of others' behavior. When somebody does something, you try to understand why this person has done something like this. So, that is called attribution. So, that is how we answer the question, why is someone acting this way? So, that is attribution process. So, attribution theory focuses on identifying the causes behind our behavior. Impression formation is focusing what kind of person he or she is, characteristics of the person, try to judge personality traits and so on. Attribution answers why this person is acting in a particular. So, we try to find the causes of behavior is attribution. So, the question focus here is why, and in the impression formation focus is on what kind of person. Here why the person is behaving the way they are behaving. So, that is called attribution process. Now, there are many theories in the attribution. Let us look into some of the major theories of attribution, how people try to judge other behaviors. One of the first theory in this context is Hyder's theory. So, Hyder proposed that people act as naive psychologists, constantly trying to understand and explain events in the social world. In doing so, they often search for cause and effect relationship, sometimes even when such relationship do not actually exist. So, we all the time try to understand cause and effect, and similarly we try to understand causes of others' behavior, why this person is behaving like this, why this another person is behaving the other ways and so on. So, we constantly try to make judgments about other people, particularly why the causes behind their behavior. So, this is a basic human psychology. So, Hyder's naive psychology looks into this whole how we do that. So, rather than presenting a fully developed theory, Hyder highlighted several key ideas about how people explain behavior. Okay? So, he said when the people try to explain others' behavior, they use two important attributions. One is called dispositional attribution, another is called situational attribution. So, dispositional attribution means internal attributions. So, when we try to judge another person's causes of behaviors, why this person is behaving like this? One possible explanation is that this person, the causes of his behavior is coming from himself or herself. The cause lies within the person. So, that is dispositional internal attribution. This person is behaving because he is like that kind of person. This is his characteristics, that is why he is behaving like this. So, that is internal attribution or dispositional attribution. When you explain behavior based on situational attribution, for example, when you say this person has behaved because he was forced to behave like this because somebody was forcing him. So, situation is responsible, not the person. So, people, one of the broad categories of attribution that people do in terms of finding causes of behavior is whether the behavior is internal or is arising from internal factors or it is arising from the situational factors. So, that is called situational versus dispositional causes. So, this theory talks about that. So, to explain behavior, people evaluate whether the behavior is coming from the situational causes, which is called external reasons. Situation causes factors outside the person. So, it is not within the person, it is outside the person. Maybe because the person is behaving because of the context, because of the environment, because of the external pressure and so on. So, then it is coming from outside. Example, if someone spills milk and cleans it, the cleaning behavior is likely to be because of the social expectation, because of the cultural norms, because of the immediate situational demand. So, this is a situational cause. Why the person is cleaning the spilled milk? When you say somebody is cleaning the spilled milk, you cannot judge the characteristics of the person based on behavior. Because this can be an expected behavior based on the social norms. So, it is because of the situation expects you to behave like this. So, you are behaving. So, then generally people will think it is the situational reason that the person is cleaning the spilled milk. So, that is how we attribute behavior, to the situations sometimes. Sometimes we attribute the reasons of behaviors to the internal reasons. So, these are called dispositional causes, which refers to individual traits, personality characteristics and enduring qualities. The person behave because of their personal qualities. So, for example, if someone spends hours polishing the kitchen floor, this is likely attributed to internal traits. Hours and hours somebody is cleaning and again and again and again. So, this is something not expected in terms of situational demands. Sometimes you clean, it is fine, but if let us say hours and hours you are cleaning again and again and again. So, that means it shows something within that person, the characteristics of the person may be obsessed with cleaning. It may not have nothing to do with the situation. So, it may be because of the person has these characteristics of neatness, perfectionism and so on, high conscientiousness. Here behavior is seen as a reflection of the internal reasons, internal characteristics. So, this theory talks about this, these are the two broad categories of causes that we attribute to the situation or to the internal dispositional characteristics of the person. There is another theory that talks about attribution is called correspondent inference theory. It was proposed by Jones and Davis in 1965. This theory explains how people infer person's internal characteristics from the external. So, these two broad categories will be there again and again in all the theories, because either you explain behavior as part of their internal characteristics or from the situational characteristics. But what are the other factors influences whether it is internal external, those factors are different in different theories, or they basically add or give more complementary factors or ideas. So, if observer believes that a behavior reflects the person's true character, they make a correspondence inference. Correspondence means when they say this behavior is the true reflection of that person's characteristics, then it is called correspondent inference, means the causes are based on dispositional causes or internal causes. Now, under which condition internal or dispositional attribution increases? According to correspondent inference theory, these are the three important factors which increases the chances or decreases the chances of internal attribution. One is called free choice, social desirability and non-common effect. So, these are the three factors which increases the likelihood of whether the person is behaving because of the internal characteristics. So, let us see how they influence. First is free choice. If a person freely chooses to perform a behavior, observers are more likely to attribute to the personality. If you do something out of freedom or free choice, you choose to do something, then it is a reflection of your characteristics, because no one is forcing you, you are choosing it. So, that means it will reflect your own internal characteristics. The person will, anyone can guess that this behavior is reflection of that person's internal characteristics. So, attribution will be internal. For example, if someone voluntarily donates money, people will infer that this person is generous, because no one is forcing him to do it, he is doing it on his own choice. So, the person, it reflects his characteristics, internal characteristics. So, we will more likely to say this person is generous. Then comes social desirability. If behaviors that are socially undesirable or unusual provides more information about the personality of the person. If somebody does something which is against social expectation, something not usual, because if something society expects, everybody will do it, it is not a reflection of that person. But if somebody does something which is unexpected, undesirable, then it is a reflection of that person's characteristics. For example, if someone cheats in the exam, now this is a reflection of that person's characteristics, simply because no one likes or no social norms encourages cheating in the exam, because it is something considered undesirable, socially undesirable. But still if somebody does it, then it reflects his characteristics. Probably will immediately make a inference about that person is dishonest, because the behavior is socially undesirable. Why would otherwise somebody do something is not desirable? Desirable everybody will do. You cannot judge a person's behavior based on desirable behavior, because everybody will do such behavior in those contexts. If somebody does opposite, then it reflection of characteristics. For example, in this case, if somebody cheats in exam, most likely we are more likely to make an assumption this person is dishonest. If the behavior is socially desirable, for example, being polite in the social situation, it reveals less about the persons, because many people does that because of the social situational demand. So, social desirability is another factor which determines whether your behavior is coming from internal or external reasons. The third reason is non-common effects. Observe or compare the possible consequences of the different actions. So, what is the consequence of the actions? If behavior has a unique consequence, it reveals more about the persons. If the behavior has a unique consequence, then it is more reflection of the person. For example, a student chooses a difficult research topic instead of an easy one. Okay? Now, it is an unique consequence, because the student could choose, he or she could have chosen very easy one, but despite that the student choose a difficult research topic. Now, this is kind of non-common effects or uncommon effects. Commonly student may not do it. So, it is something very different. So, this reflects the characteristics of the person, of the student. So, observer may infer that the student is highly motivated or intellectually curious, because the choice has consequences that is different from alternatives, non-common effects because of the consequences. So, it can also reflect the behavior, personal characteristics of the person. So, that is another theory that talks about how do we attribute causes of a behavior, and causes are mostly either external or internal. The next theory of attribution, which adds little bit more dimensions to this attribution theory processes, is Kelly's attribution theory. Harold Kelly proposed covariation model of attribution. So, this is another model which is like little bit more advanced. When trying to understand why an event occurs, such as friend not showing up, someone not replying to messages, or not getting a job promotion, people engage in causal attribution. So, in all such situations, people try to understand why this is happening, why someone is not calling me, and so on. The core question is whether this behavior results from internal or external causes. So, in all attribution theory, the factors, broad factors are same, internal causes or external causes, but other things around it is like they have added more and more nuances around it. Because the possible causes are many, we simplify the process in this model, which says there are three types of information that we use to make internal or external attributions. What are these three information? One is consensus, another is consistency, third one is distinctiveness. What are these? Consensus means Do other people react the same way to the same situation? Let us say there is a situation. What is the consensus? Means, is this person behaving like this in this situation, or everybody else is also behaving like this? If everybody else behave, then high consensus. If only this person is behaving differently as compared to other, then low consensus. Means, person is very differently behaving from other people. If it is same with other people, it is high consensus. If it is different, then it is low consensus. Then comes consistency. Does the same person behave same way across time? How is this is the behavior of this person is same across different situation, or is it only uniquely this situation based? Same person is behaving similarly in other situations or differently in other situations. So, that consistency. If it is similar in other situation, there is high consistency. If it is dissimilar in other situation, then low consistency. The third one is distinctiveness. Does the person behave same way towards other stimuli? What is the behavior of this person? Is this person behaving only in this situation, or the person's behavior in other situations, other different situations also same or different? So, that is distinctiveness. Based on that, people make many attributions. For example, we will see some examples. The consensus, as we said, it is how people behave in the same situation, how other people, not just same person, but other people. High consensus means many people also behave same way, just like this person. Low consensus means very few people, this person is uniquely behaving. For example, high consensus, most people who eat at the restaurant also say the food tastes bad. Let us say the person X says the food is bad, but then you also find out other people are also saying the food is bad. So, that means consensus is high. Okay. Low consensus means most people say the food is good, only this person, let us say Ria, complains. So, consensus is low, others are not saying, but Ria is only complaining. So, consensus is low. So, how do we interpret this consensus? High consensus means the restaurant may be the problem, because everybody is saying bad food. So, that means there is a problem with the restaurant, with the situation. Low consensus means only Ria is creating issues, others are not creating problems. So, that means there may be some problem with the Ria herself, because others are not complaining. So, based on consensus, we can make certain attributions. Then comes consistency. Consistency is whether the person behaves the same way in other situations often. High consensus means the person behaves this way every time in same situation. Whenever the person is in the same situation, he or she behaves similarly. So, that is high consistency. Low consistency means the behavior occurs rarely similarly in the same situation. Example, high consistency. Every time Ria eats at this restaurant, she says the food tastes bad. So, consistency is very high. Every time the Ria comes to the same restaurant, she says the food is bad. So, highly consistent. Low consistency what? Usually Ria likes food there, but today she is complaining. So, the consistency is low. Only today she is complaining, not other time. So, how do we interpret this? If there is a high consistency, that means something is stable, causing the behavior. That means, so every time Ria eats in the restaurant, she says the food tastes bad. So, there may be something with the restaurant, because the consistency is very high. Something is very stable within the person also, maybe the person has certain dislike for whatever about the restaurant and so on. Low consistency means the causes may be temporary. So, maybe today she has bad mood, or she is not liking food and so on. So, it is temporary. And the last one, distinctiveness, it refers whether the person behaves same way in other situations. High distinctive means behavior occurs only in this situation and not in other situation. Low distinctiveness means behavior occurs across many situations, similarly other situation also, there is no distinctiveness. Example, high distinctiveness example, Ria enjoys food at other restaurants, but complains only about this particular one, very distinctive. She is not complaining about other restaurant, but only about this. So, it is highly distinctive. Low distinctive means Ria complains about food in many restaurants, wherever she goes she complains about the food. So, distinctiveness is low, her behavior is almost same across different situations. How do we interpret this? High distinctiveness means the restaurant is likely to be the problem, because she enjoys food in other restaurant, but not in here, maybe there is a problem in the restaurant. Low distinctiveness means the issue may be with the Ria personally, because she complains about food in many restaurants. So, probably there is a problem with the RIA, not with the restaurant. So, based on this combination of these three factors, we can have internal attribution or external attribution. So, this attributional process according to Kelly, what happens? Internal attribution occurs when consensus low, distinctiveness low, consistency high. With these three combination, whenever happens together, we give internal attribution. So, it is little bit more nuanced understanding of attribution as compared to the earlier theories. So, this behavior reflects the person's trait. For example, low consensus means others like the food, only Ria does not like the food. High consistency means Ria always complains here. So, low consensus, high consistency. Then low distinctiveness. Low distinctiveness means she complains about many restaurants. So, that means Ria is very critical or picky about food. Something within her is a reflection of this behavior. This behavior reflects her internal characteristics or personality of the Ria. If there is a three combination, low consensus, high consistency, low distinctiveness, then we are more likely to give internal attribution in such situations or in such combinations. External attribution happens when consensus is high, distinctiveness is high, consistency is also high. When all the three are high, then we are more likely to make external attribution. For example, high consistency, many people complain about that a particular restaurant. High consistency means Ria always complains here. High distinctiveness means what? She complains only about this restaurant. So, that means the conclusion, restaurant food is actually bad, because there is a high consensus, other people are also saying bad, not just Ria. Ria is always complaining about it, and distinctive, she is complaining only about this, not about other restaurant. So, that means the restaurant has some issues. So, we attribute the Ria's behavior to external situations, here the restaurant. So, all these three combination can create either internal attribution or external attribution. So, other combination can be there, then it will become more confusing, but these two combinations are very clearly reflecting internal and external attributions. So, Kelly theory has been supported by many social contexts, although later research suggests that certain modifications are needed, like factor like biases, limited information, shortcuts may affect our judgment beyond this factor. Although the Kelly's factors are very important and they have received lot of research support, but these are not the only information that we use to judge or attribute the causes of behavior. There are many other things that can influence, like biases, our limited information, shortcuts, all this can influence how do we find reasons behind behaviors. So, we will discuss some of these biases particularly related to attribution. When we find causes of behavior, there can be biases. As we discussed, there can be biases in the impression formation, there can be biases in the attribution also. So, let us see what are the possible biases. So, although attribution assumes that people interpret behaviors logically, rationally, but it does not happen in real life. Real life social perception often do not follow very ideal rational processing of information. Research shows that despite the theory's general accurate predictions, individuals display systematic and consistent biases when making attributions. As a result, people frequently misinterpret the causes of behavior, leading to distorted judgments rather than rational content. So, many times we distort judgments and that can lead to many biases in the attributions. There are many such biases. For example, one bias is called fundamental attribution or error. It is also called as correspondent bias. What is this bias? This is a term introduced by Jones in 1979. It refers to tendency to assume that person behaviors directly reflect the disposition even when the situational causes are clearly present. We have a biasness in finding causes of other behavior in terms of their personality trait. We generally were biased by saying this person is behaving because this person is like this, or this is the characteristics of the person, that is why this person is behaving. We ignore situational reasons of others' behavior. We give more emphasis on personal characteristics of the person in their behavior. This is called fundamental attributional bias. So, it is very common, therefore, it is called fundamental bias. So, this fundamental attributional error refers to the common tendency to overestimate dispositional causes. We all the time overestimate. This person behave because this person is like this, not because we do not tend to look that this person might have behaved because of the situational reasons or pressures in the situation, not because the person is like this. For example, seeing someone arrive late, drop papers, break glasses and spill coffee may lead us to label them clumsy or disorganized. Immediately we will judge this person is very clumsy person, because all the time he or she is late, drops paper and break glasses. One or two instances we see and immediately judge this person is a clumsy person. But we do not see that even for all of these causes there may be external reasons. Person may be late because of sudden delays in the road and traffic. There might be reasons to slippery papers and hot cups and so on. We generally ignore those factors and immediately jump to the personal characterization of the person. So, that is called fundamental attributional error. This is so frequent that people call it as a fundamental attributional bias. Some of the classic research show that this bias is very powerful and persistent, even when people know there may be situational reasons, still they ignore that. Why this bias happens? Because of perceptual salience, one reason. When observing others, we focus only on the person, not the situations. When we see others behaving, we only see that person is behaving and we do not see that there can be situational reasons for such behaviors. So, therefore, we say this person is behaving because of these personal reasons, characteristics of the person. So, the situational factors in the environment are less visible for us. So, we do not pay attention to them. As a result, people are more likely to have internal explanation of the situation. Second reason is insufficient use of situational information. Even though we may notice some situational factors, we undervalue them and still favor disposition. That is why it is bias. There is a biasness in our mind itself. Even though we see there are situational reasons somebody is doing something, we still do not value it. We still say this is the person is like this, therefore, something is happening like this. So, that is the third reason is two-step attribution process. We automatically assume the behavior is the reflection of the person, personal characteristics. Later, we try to correct the situation, but then it is usually weak or incomplete. Because the first assumption itself is causing biases, that the person's behaviors are reflection of their personal characteristics. So, that is the dominant assumptions. Then we try to fit and see situation, even if we see situational reason, it is still weak. So, these are the reasons why this fundamental attribution error happens. So, actor observer effect, the another biases in the attribution is actor observer effect. So, it is just opposite to what we have discussed in the fundamental attribution. So, when we find causes of others behavior, we always attribute they are behaving because of internal reason or the personal characteristics. But when we try to find reasons for our own behavior, we always say I have behaved because of the situational reasons, not because of the personal characteristics, particularly the negative context. So, that is called actor observer effect. So, for example, if someone else trips or falls, we assume they are clumsy, but if we trip ourselves, we blame ice on the sidewalk or some slipperiness and so on. So, that is the opposite kind of attribution we do. So, that is another kind of biases. Why this happens? This bias occur because we are more aware of the external situation in our case. So, we always say this is because of the situation I am doing, particularly in the negative context. And but when we judge other people, we always focus on their behavior and their personal characteristics and we ignore the situational context. So, that is why these biases are very prevalent. Then there is another bias which is called as self-serving bias. So, it is typically in the context of success and failure. It is a tendency for people to attribute their successes to internal personal factors and failure to external situational factors. When we succeed in something, we always give internal personal factors reasoning. We succeed because of our hard work, because of our skill and so on. So, we attribute it to our internal factors, but when we fail, we tend to attribute it to external reasons. Then we say I failed because we blame someone else or something like that. So, that is called self-serving bias. This is also very prevalent among human beings. For example, a coach takes credits of team's victory to good coaching. He said, generally he may think that it is because of my coaching, good coaching, that the team won or they got victory, but blames a loss to players' poor skills. But when they fail, you blame the players, they have not played well and so on. So, this is an example of self-serving bias. A student attributes an A grade to hard work, but poor grade to an unfair professor. And this is an example of self-serving bias. Why this happens? This pattern is attribution helps protect self-esteem and maintain positive self-image. We do this to protect our self-image, self-esteem, because when we fail, we say I have not failed, I have failed because of somebody else or some other reasons. So, it protects your self-esteem. So, people tend to in order to protect the self-esteem, self-image, they tend to do this self-serving bias. So, this halo effect, another biases that is also can lead to attributional biases is called halo effect. It is the tendency to initial that they possess other positive trait as well. So, when you see an initial impression of a person and then you assume and kind of make an assumption about the whole personality of the person, add other things to that. So, one characteristics initial impression and then you make whole judgment about the person. So, that is called halo effect. For example, if Harry is described as intelligent, kind and loving, people are likely to assume he is also conscientious even without evidence. So, that is looking at few characteristics and then you judging other things also. Reverse is also true. Learning someone is unsocial or argumentative may lead us to assume additional negative traits such as laziness and so on. So, that is called halo effect. Because real people rarely have entirely positive or entirely negative qualities, the halo effect often results in misjudgment and so on. So, initial few impression and you make judgments about others and feel other things and so on. So, that is called halo effect. Now, at the end we will talk about applications of this attribution theory. Now, how this theory can be applied in the real life context. One specific application of attribution theory is in the context of depression. Research shows that nearly 50% all human experience depressive symptoms sometime at their life, not necessarily a clinical depression, but some symptoms of depression. Multiple biological, psychological, social factors can explain why depression happens. There are many reasons to it. One of the reasons psychologists found that is related to attributional style. How they find causes of their behaviors can also lead to depression. For example, depressed individuals generally show self-defeating attributional pattern. What does that mean? Most people show self-serving bias. So, if they fail in something, they will say I am not responsible, something else is responsible. If they succeed, they will say I have done it. So, that is self-serving. Depressed people does the opposite. Many people, many such depressed people. So, that is one of, there is a problem with the attribution, how they find causes. For example, they will say success is to, so that is self-serving bias. So, depressed individuals generally show the reverse pattern. They engage in what is called depressive attributional style. So, they will just opposite, success to they will give to external, failure to internal. So, I failed because of I am responsible, I have done something wrong. So, that kind of create more depressive symptoms and so on. For example, how they do it, if there is a negative outcome, some failure, they will give it to internal, stable, uncontrollable causes. They will say it is my fault, internal. When they kind of, there is a negative thing. I am always like this. So, that means when you say I am always like this means I cannot change, there is a less chance of change. So, that stable characteristics. I can't change, this is uncontrollable because not in my control, I cannot change myself. So, they have this kind of attributional style when something negative happens. So, that adds more and more to depressive symptoms because they do not see any control in their life, they do not see any control in terms of how could they change themselves. In case of positive outcomes, they will give attribution to external, temporary, unstable causes. For example, when they let us say succeed in something, they will just say it is just maybe I was lucky or maybe some situational reason they will say, or they will say someone help me, maybe that is kind of thing. So, they will give more situational thing. This won't happen again. So, they will see like more reasons to be sad about it. This has happened maybe by chance, it may not happen again and so on. So, like positive outcomes, they will have kind of reverse kind of attribution done by the normal people. Whatever they do, depressed people tend to do the reverse of it. It is one of the reasons, not necessarily this is the only reasons or this is the only thing that is visible in depressed people, but this research has shown that depressed people have this kind of opposite kind of attributional style as compared to self-serving bias that most of the people do. So, this may lead to or contribute to further depression and so on. So, this leads to a lot of all the symptom of lack of control in life, helplessness in life. It all worsens at the moment you feel helpless, the more depressive symptoms comes and so on. So, it is a kind of cycle, vicious cycle. One leads to more other, and the symptoms lead to further depression, depression leads to further attributional, depressive attributional style and so on. So, this is like a vicious cycle and so on. Fortunately, research shows if they change this attributional pattern, their symptoms reduces and so on. So, a lot of therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy actually tries to change those attributional pattern in the depressive people. The last application of attribution theory is we can explain using attribution to understand terrorism and group violence that is done. So, there is something called as in-group, out-group attributional bias. So, what happens here? There is a consistent finding in social psychology that people judge their own group harmful action as more favorable than another group's identical action. When a group, so this is a group level bias, when your own group does something bad, you do not look at it bad, but when another group does the same thing, you judge them very negatively. So, that is called in-group, out-group attributional bias. When you do as a group something, then it is fine. When the same thing does by another group, you say it is not okay and it is problematic, So, that is a bias that people have in the group level. For example, when your group does some violence, you say it was necessary and defensive and morally right. When other group does violence, you say they are aggressive, unjustified and evil people. This is called the ultimate attributional error, a form of intergroup bias where positive behaviors by the in-group, they say it is internal causes, positive done because our group is good, people are good and so on. When they do something negative, they say we have done it because to get justice or something else, some kind of situational factors. It was not we have done something out of choice, but we are forced to do something like this. So, they will give always situational justification. When the negative behavior by the another group, they will always say internal causes. These people are bad, wrong. So, therefore, they are doing it. So, this explains why terrorists and nations can simultaneously feel morally justified. So, both terrorist group and nations both can simultaneously say both the actions are same and both can do in the kind of like violence. So, for terrorists it is they will justify it as a right kind of move and the nation will probably tell them they are wrong people, and nation can when does something against them they could say this is also justified, but other group will say they are bad kind of people and so on. So, we always try to justify the wrong actions of our own group, but the same actions done by another group we always say this is not good. So, this is called in-group, out-group attributional bias. So, at the group level also we have many biases in finding causes of others' behavior. So, these are some things about the social perceptions. We will talk about other things in the social psychology. We will have 3 more lectures also. So, but here these are a few things about social perception. With this I end here. Thank you.